2014 National Humanities Medal to REBECCA NEWBERGER GOLDSTEIN for bringing philosophy into conversation with culture. In scholarship, Dr. Goldstein has elucidated the ideas of Spinoza and Gödel, while in fiction, she deploys wit and drama to help us understand the great human conflict between thought and feeling.
Because I was spoken of as an Orthodox writer and, interviewed as an Orthodox writer. I was not my inner world, exactly as I am today, an atheist and a humanist. I would much more identify myself as a secular humanist. But I couldn't say anything that would blow my cover and embarrass my family. Bring shame on my family. So that was difficult. It was a constant negotiation. How do I keep my integrity and not, do anything for which my family is going to feel very bad? Now, maybe my family was wrong to do that to me. Maybe they were. Maybe they should have allowed me. I know they thought that they were doing it for my own good. They're believers. And there is this asymmetry, I think, between believers and unbelievers. I would never ask a religious person, well, act as if you don't believe. Violate these things that you think are true. And eat the cheeseburger, right? Wear the bikini, right? All this story. I would never feel I had the right to do that. That if they want to persist in those beliefs. But there's a real asymmetry between and even the a-religious feel it. So to me, maybe it has something to do with my upbringing and my ultimate, passivity that I had been raised in. But for me, this made perfect sense. And that's the way I did it. And it was difficult. There were, I'm kind of whitewashing it now, but yeah, there were many times when I felt tormented by, I don't want to mislead anybody, I don't want to say anything that's wrong, but I don't believe, but I don't want to bring shame on my family. It was very difficult. The other thing, when I was still in the throes of trying to become a believer, why was that so important to me? Well, first of all, I didn't want to be alienated from my family. I didn't want to be alienated from my community. The community was not as important to me. It was my family. And I wanted to think and to feel as they did. And it was kind of a cozier world when I believed in God. It was a morally baffling world, but it was a cozier world, and I knew that I mattered, God cared, and, I mattered in some large cosmic sense, or I thought that, and that it mattered that I had been born into this particular group, and I had a life script that I had to play out. I didn't have to make it up for myself. I knew what was required for me in order to be a good person. All of those questions were answered for me, and I tried to cling to it for as long as I could, and that's why I cried. That last time I ever wept tears over this, and then I decided to embrace it, and that I was going to try to figure out to the best of my ability, read as much as I could, educate myself as best as I could, expose myself to all the great ideas that are out there, that was going to be my great adventure, to try to partake in the advancement of those ideas in whatever small way I could, that was going to be my adventure. And it was riskier, and it was, I had to make up the script for myself, but there it is. So it's very faded. I don't know how was a long time ago. I had just turned 19. And so, here I am looking. I think I look like a lamb being led to the slaughter. But the sort of the downcast, the passivity, the Sheldon Goldstein, the man I was marrying, that was my grandfather, rabbi, my grandmother. That's a wig she's wearing. The rabbi who was marrying us. But anyway, so this was. I think it's really the only picture I have of me as at that stage in my life. Just in contrast, right? Because I did try to forge my own path, and this, what has seemed to me, sometimes to be a heartbreaking and difficult and full of risk, and often extremely frustrating, but my life, it's my life. This is a moment in which my life was being rewarded in a way that how could that little girl have ever dreamt of? I'm at the White House. I'm standing next to President Obama. That's the medal he's about to put around my neck for my contributions. I was getting the National Medal of the Humanities. And so, yeah, it's before, it's after. I'm standing up straight. Anyway, so that's, sometimes I feel, or when I look at this picture, I feel like, yeah, this was the right, it was the right decision. It's the right decision not only for me, but maybe, I've been able to make contributions that through my writing, through my thinking, through my teaching, and through my own struggles, that I've always, that I felt passionately from the very beginning, trying to think things out, to our advancement, in the smallest little way possible. But this is not something I was born into. This was so far from the agenda that I was handed as a child. I published my first book when I was young. 1983 was the first. I was already young assistant professor of philosophy. Had gone back to Barnard after I got my doctorate from Princeton and was a member of the philosophy department. But I was, for this very long time, was living this bifurcated life and known as sort of in my public life as a feminist, but was anything but, was a good Jewish housewife when I came home, which really meant I never invited my colleagues home. I really lived a very separate life, and I think it was difficult. I never wore my hair covered, but I was appropriately modest. I always wore slacks, jeans, but but I was, no, you wouldn't have known by looking at me. In 2006 was the first time I wrote a book where I kind of tried to integrate it. My life had already become integrated. My mother died in 2000, and my father had died long before, and that's when that was it. Okay, that was the deal I had made. I mean, even that, I made a vow to myself at 15. And I felt obliged to keep that vow. I mean, that's another thing. That's the Orthodox way. You make a vow, you keep your vow. Vows are very, very important. It did occur to me to break my vow. It just didn't occur to me. But that was the vow I had made until my parents died. And then I left my husband, I left the community, I integrated my life, but I never had really published anything about it. And first of all, why write anything about myself? I mean, I got interesting subjects. I had all philosophy, right? I've got why would I write about myself? But I was asked to write a book about Spinoza, and it was a series about Jewish thinkers thinking about Jewish thinkers, and so I was writing. At first, I said, no, I'm not a Jewish thinker. I'm not going to be defined. I'm not a woman thinker, and I'm not a Jewish thinker. I'm a thinker. When I turned it down at first, I said, well, Spinoza wasn't a Jewish thinker. It's a betrayal of Spinoza to interpret him from a sectarian point of view. He is the great apostle of universalism. He makes the Enlightenment. What, are you kidding me? Right? He's not, I'm a Jewish thinker, and he most certainly is not a Jewish thinker. And the very passion of my denunciation of the project is what made the editor say, you've got to write this book. There's so much passion here. So I was writing it with that passion of, and that's why I called it Betraying Spinoza, because actually his Jewish background did come into, it was relevant for his being the radical thinker that he was. It was relevant that he came from this particular community, a victimized community. His community was one of escapees from the Iberian Inquisition. They were living in Amsterdam, but they had all come from Portugal, and where they had to convert to Catholicism and live as secret Jews, and then they come to Amsterdam and they embrace Judaism. And it was that tight-knit, traumatized community that Spinoza grew up in. And I grew up in a tight-knit, traumatized community. And so that seems sort of relevant. And so a little bit of my story and my great attachment to Spinoza, and the way, to me, he's very personal. He's very personal. Came into the writing of that book. So I did. Also, Spinoza's a very hard philosopher to understand. My students right now are going crazy. They're pulling out their hair trying to understand Spinoza's philosophy. And I wanted to bring a little bit more of the personal into it, both his personal, story. Not that it's relevant to understanding his philosophy, but to personalize him. He's such an impersonal philosopher. He writes in the Euclidean model, starts with definitions and axioms and deducing his propositions, numbered propositions, to show something of where he was coming from, why he uses Cartesian rationalism to try to solve the problem of suffering. And he knew he was brought up in the stories of suffering the way I was brought up in stories of suffering. And how do we come to terms with a universe that allows this sort of thing? I think that's somewhat relevant. Anyway, that was my take on it. So that was the first place and I don't know that, because it was, I thought, useful for the reader and would enliven what is in fact a very difficult philosophy, to bring in both of these personal aspects. So yeah, it was I hope I didn't, it was just a little bit of the personal story. I hope not too much, because Spinoza's story is far more important and far more interesting. But yeah, it was the first time, and people were surprised to find out. A lot of people who knew me for a very long time were surprised to find out that in fact I had gone to such a high school, and that's where I had first come in contact with Spinoza, and that getting to college had been an achievement for me. Certainly going on, getting my doctorate and becoming a professor had been not something written into my script, not something celebrated. It was in spite of, or despite, not in spite of, but despite that all of those things had happened. So that was the justification. Yeah, what was so funny was that, when I was this little girl, and this ignorant little girl, so very ignorant, in this high school, and we were learning Historia, Jewish history, and we were learning about modernity. We were against it. It's all downhill since Babylonia. It's been all downhill, and I immediately picked up on. I never asked questions in that class. I usually never even went to class. I often play hooky. And I used to, come into New York. I was living in a suburb of New York. I would come into New York, take the train into New York. My parents thought I was heading to school, but I would head usually, to a library or a museum. I was trying to get myself an education. I knew I wasn't getting it in that school. But it was one of the first times I ever actually asked a question in class. I hardly ever asked, in one of our religious classes, maybe in secular classes, I would ask questions, but not in religious classes. But, the teacher had said, he was very well brought up, and he was supposed to be a great rabbi, and then he went astray, and it was this cautionary tale, and he became a Shanda for the Yidden. He became it's Yiddish for a disgrace for the Jews. He was a disgrace, and that was very, I did not want to be a disgrace. That was very ingrained in me. But but she did say, he said these two ridiculous things, and everybody thought it was ridiculous. The Christians too, which is true. He said that, God didn't write the Torah, and he said that God is nature. And I remember I raised my hand and I asked, "What do you mean by that?" The teacher was very suspicious. Like, this is the first time I wake up in class and ask a question, and she didn't. I remember I was kind of trying to push it. Did he mean this? Did he mean this? Did he mean this? And she was like, why is she suddenly so interested? But yeah, it was an immediate interest in him. And then when I went to graduate school, and I became, philosophy is very divided into different camps of philosophy, and I was calling analytic philosophy. I specialized in philosophy of science and specialized in philosophy of mathematics. We didn't like, we highly scientifically oriented philosophers didn't like called metaphysics, and Spinoza was like the worst example. It seemed of a kind of metaphysics trying to a priori deduce the nature of reality. And so I very much dismissed him as a philosopher too. But I liked the rationalists, 17th century rationalism. I liked Descartes and I liked Leibniz. And then there was this nutcase in between Spinoza with this crazy work. But I volunteered to teach it, because I really liked Descartes and I liked Leibniz. And first few times I taught Spinoza, I spent very little time. I thought it was ridiculous. The third time, it started to make sense to me, and I saw what he was up to and what the assumptions were there. And then it became my favorite thing to teach. But there were two different parts of my background that were pushing me against Spinoza, my religious upbringing, and my training as a philosopher was such as to make me dismiss him. And it's funny because he's now my favorite philosopher to teach, and he's actually had a very large influence on my outlook. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Our humor is, I think, is very Jewish. But some things, but not the important things. I wouldn't say that the important things have anything to do with his being Jewish. I feel very, very close to. I have friends who are not Jewish. I mean, probably my three closest friends are not Jewish. There was a great meeting of minds. And I find that very thrilling. I actually find it one of the most moving experiences in life to be able to thoroughly understand people who, with whom you have very little, in terms of your background, in common. And that because you have struggled with your beliefs and try to make them truly your own, not handed to you, ready-made, because of the group you happen to be been born into, that you have sort of followed parallel paths and come very much to the same point of view in many, many areas, and that you understand each other very deeply because of that. You know, I find that a moving, a thrilling experience. It's one of the reasons, you know, I love the life of intellectual struggle, because you really intellectually, you understand other people who have, and it's just, to me, very beautiful. My husband is, you know, he's constantly amazed because we're so similar. He's amazed that, given how different our backgrounds are, there is so much agreement in our point of view, in our points of view. We met when we were mature and had thought things out for ourselves, and so we, you know, I mean, yes, now we sometimes influence each other, but for the most part, no, you know, we ended up where we ended up without the influence of each other, and we ended up in very much the same place, and that's interesting. And he's also, I think, very, very interested by the more exotic, what he considers, even though he's Jewish, the more exotic elements of my background. And the first time he came to one of the family weddings, he said he felt like he had wandered on a set of Fiddler on the Roof. You know, it was just, he wasn't really sure that people, you know, he comes from a pretty secular, progressive background. He didn't know that there were still intelligent Jews who were like this. And, you know, and it is an extremely intelligent family. They're not dummies by any means. So, yeah, I think he's pretty tickled by the ways in which that we're similar. I'm not as tickled by his, you know, the sort of progressive, liberal Judaism, because, well, it's not exotic. It's what many Jews that I come in contact with are like, you know. You know, I value the emphasis on intellectuality. I think that is, you know, I think that influenced me tremendously. The highest praise in my family was that somebody, of course, it was always applied to a boy or a man, a male, you know, that he's a Talmud Chacham, you know, that he's a disciple of the wise, you know, and to be a scholar is a very lofty position, the loftiest, much loftier than being rich. My family had no interest in money. They had no respect for money. We were, because of my father's position as a cantor, and we were living in Westchester, which is a very affluent area of the world, we were living among great wealth, and we lived in this little pocket of poverty. And I never felt ashamed. I would have friends over. I never was ashamed of this, you know, because the values of the family, and this, I think they were thoroughly Jewish in this. It was, they were, you know, the values were to be good, to be virtuous, to be pure, to be humble, and to be, you know, reflective, thoughtful, ask a lot of questions. Don't question the whole, you know, basis of everything, but within there, you know, ask questions. And my father would give me tremendous praise when I asked a difficult question. We used to study, I was not supposed to study Talmud as a girl, but my father did, in secret, study Talmud with me because he thought that would quench what he saw as my intellectual ambition. And he, you know, when I would ask a difficult question, you know, it's not when I would give an answer that he would be proud of me. It was when I asked a very difficult question within that framework, you know. So, and that's something, yeah, I really respect. And I feel that it helped to train my mind. I come from many generations of rabbinical scholars. I feel sometimes that I was genetically bred to be a philosopher, to ask these questions. That this was the direction of the family history, and so yeah, that had a huge effect on me. I'm always surprised when people, for example, respect people because they're rich, that they have money. It's like, what? You respect them for that? It always takes me aback. I'm always just very, very surprised by that. And that I get from definitely from my very Jewish family. Oh, that's so interesting that you asked that, because I thought about my father so much when I was there in the White House. My father, he was born in Poland. He loved America, but he never felt completely at home. There are so many immigrants don't, and I just kept, and he was baffled by my ambition, just baffled why it was never enough for me that I had to go to Barnard. I had to go to Princeton, get my doctorate. I had to go become a professor, and keep writing books and knocking myself out. And he was sort of very baffled by it. And but I remember once, he was picking me up. I was going to his house for a holiday. It was Sukkot. And he came for the first time to my office. And I had a very nice office at Columbia, corner office. And he came and he saw, he knew I was a professor, but he saw this little sign, my little name sign on the door, Professor Goldstein. and it was for the first time, it was real to him. And that I was actually a professor at this big university, and with a nice office and everything. And then we were driving back to his house, and he said, in Europe, a philosopher was considered a very high thing. That was a very high thing. And it was like he was struggling, because it was hard for him to realize that this girl who was a girl, was this thing that he had some respect for. And so, that was interesting for me. I didn't pursue it any further, but I saw that it was something that he had thought about, seeing that Professor Goldstein. And but I just kept thinking, what would it be like for him to see this? I would, of course, taken him to the White House, and that would have been my great joy. And if it was hard for him to get his head wrapped around seeing Professor Goldstein, what would it have done to him to see his little Rivka getting in the White House? I don't know. I wish he had lived to see it. I wouldn't recommend that anybody do it the way I did it. I think everybody has to work it out, their own way, but to never compromise this great responsibility we have for justifying our beliefs. It's a great responsibility that we have. We act on our beliefs. We only have one chance at life, and it is, you want to flourish. You want to meet your full potential. You want to live as richly as you possibly can. And then how you negotiate with the people who you might hurt by doing that, I think, that depends on who you are and what your particular situation is. I think I made too many compromises, and I would not recommend that anybody do it my way. But it's good to not hurt people as much as possible. It's something I truly believe in. And there is community outside. There is wonderful adventure outside, the adventures of meeting people who are so different from you, have such different stories to tell, and with whom you can be very, very close, nevertheless. This is one of life's just brilliant adventures, and yeah, and I would be interested in helping anybody that I could. I think support is important, from somebody who has gone through this for themselves. And I often hear from people from many religions who have these doubts, and some of them have become very good friends of mine. There's already a great deal in common in this sort of thing. So I'm always interested in hearing from such people. But many who have gone through this are interested in this, in reaching out to others who have gone through this. I'm not at all singular in this desire. Yeah. Taking responsibility for your own beliefs, your own actions. You are the cause of them because you think they're right. You think your beliefs are true, and you've struggled enough so that you're always keeping an open mind and always listening to others and testing, and you're self-critical and all of those things that make for a life of real reason. And same thing with what you do. You take full responsibility for it because you have freely, put free will to the side here, but you have freely chosen them. You are accountable for them. To me, that's freedom. And to be able to freely live the kind of life that is right for me, which is a life of being out in the world, of trying to produce some kind of work that will be a progress and not regress, or not just spinning my wheels, to have some little part in what I take to be the best that we humans try to do. This is, to me, this is a privilege. This is, that I'm free to participate in this is just on a still. Sometimes I look around at the life that I have, the people I know, the people who I can listen to and who will listen to me, and we can bounce ideas off of one another, and I just can't believe that this is the life that I'm living. It's just shocking to me. So yeah, free in the widest, most expansive sense possible is at the best of my life how I'm feeling. I'm one lucky little kid. I'm a very lucky person.